His daring celebrated the rugged individualism of the past, and his technological skill promised a wonderful future in which that incredible machine would reign supreme. The Great War just ended had spurred the advance of machines, and it would spur the economy too. The profits of key industries during that slaughter in Europe meant huge sums for new investment when the war ended. So things were ripe to boom, and boom they did. We became a consumer society, and the visible evidence of this could be found in our homes with telephones, mixmasters, the electric toaster, and the lightweight electric iron. And of course, on our streets and highways with the automobile. When Henry Ford declared that machinery is the new Messiah, you could hear in the hum of the multitudinous factories a mighty chorus of alleluias. Henry Ford introduced his Model T in 1908 and the assembly line in 1910. But it was in the 20s that his assembly line swung into high gear. By 1925, a Model T was rolling off the line every 10 seconds. Ford sought standardization above all things.
The customer can have a Ford any color he wants, so long as it's black.
But Americans soon wanted colors other than black and different models, and got them from General Motors and other manufacturers. By 1929, American automakers were turning out close to 5 million cars a year. There were 26 million automobiles and trucks on the road, roughly one car per family. Even working people found a way to buy a car.
As a tenant farmer, we're not wealthy. We're very poor. But we did have automobile. We did have automobile.
There was a start, no limit. We could go as fast as we wanted. And we went fast.
In the 20s, too, electric light and power came to all but rural areas. For Americans, it meant the first appearance of appliances we now take for granted. These appliances were designed for women. Not much talk then of men sharing the drudgery of housework. Promotional films promised that women's work would be easier once she got electricity. With electricity came the telephone. Before the end of the decade, more than 10 million phones were in use.
Of course, we had no dialing whatever. We took up the receiver and held it until we had a lovely female voice ask, "Number, please."
And there was another electrical miracle to send the human voice across the miles: radio.
Our friends in the immediate neighborhood, would come in of an evening and be entertained. It was a wonderful innovation. We loved it.
The mass consumer society had indeed arrived. With it came, for many, a period of freewheeling, high-living prosperity.
It isn't as though I just want money. I just want to be extravagant. I didn't care about a $5 or a $10 or a $100 bill. And that epitomized the 20s.
I finally got making about $100 a week. That was terrific. You see, I never went anyplace. I wouldn't cross the street without getting a checker cab,
Everybody had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you were terrific, you had right up to there. And it was just beautiful. Not just junky old diamond bracelets, but beautiful ones.
The great bull market, the most frantic boom yet, hit its full stride in 1927. The old American gospel said, "Work hard and get rich." The new gospel said, "Pick those apples off those trees."
Everybody would go out and play bridge, as you say, 2-note trumps. Oh, by the way, did you buy any Kennecott copper? No, I must buy some Kennecott copper. No, 3 hearts.
I was a $2 broker, which means that as a member of the stock exchange, I went on the floor as an agent. One of the main reasons why the market was participated in by most anybody was that they had very low margin rules.
If you bought $6,000 worth of stock, you only had to put up $600 worth.
This seemed like a pretty good thing when everything was going up all the time. They always said that you were getting 6 tips from your taxi driver every time you got into a cab. He'd tell you what to buy, and nobody seemed to much care what it was, just so they had a name.
I didn't know what I was buying. There was one called Eidegen Schilt. I don't know to this day what Eidegen Schilt was.
And then they would go haywire on margin and really maybe clean up $25,000, somebody who'd never had anything. This made them think that they were speculative geniuses.
And then when it went down, you see, you had to cover. And when you couldn't cover, and your jewels went to the pawn shop, and then you still couldn't cover, it was all gone.
It was gone, as we all know, in the crash of '29. But let's not forget once again how memory and fact can diverge. Less than half of 1% of the population ever traded on margin. Most Americans wrestled with more mundane economics.
I couldn't make enough money. On most jobs, I was making only about 25 cents an hour, 30 cents an hour, and cost about 25 cents for a rather greasy meal in a greasy spoon restaurant.
I wore patch pants, but so did the little white boy around the corner whose father owned the pharmacy.
I think we were probably poor. Otherwise, why would I go to work for $10 a week out of just a year and a half of high school?
You will find economists today who believe that what brought on the Great Depression was a spectacular fall in consumer spending as the 20s ended. For those who had shared in it, the boom was going bust. And even with the new prosperity, half the country still lived in poverty. In one of the letters I treasure from my mother, there is this paragraph. In those days, we didn't even have radio, only the weekly newspaper. We heard that banks were going broke, and our parents were always scared to death the one that supported them would be the next. And once it was. When the bank foreclosed on my grandparents' farm, my grandfather took a job in the cotton gin. My parents had been working the farm with him, so they had to leave too. Dad went to work on a crew helping to build a highway to Oklahoma City. He earned $1.50 a day and felt lucky at that. The national economy was in serious trouble. Coal mining, to name just one industry, was depressed. Average unemployment for the decade was 30%. New England's textile and shoe factories started to shut down. The region stayed depressed through the decade. It was also a bad time for farmers, once our economic backbone. In 1921, farmers suffered a net loss of $6 billion, and they never really recovered. So millions of Americans, regardless of where they lived or at what they worked, did not fully share in the new consumer society.
We don't have electricity. We rely upon the kerosene.
We had gas light. So we didn't have any electrical fixtures or lights or anything like that.
We had ice box. When the Iceman did drive through there, we got ice. Otherwise, we went and got it.
The Iceman brought up a piece of ice every second day or so.
The only appliance that we had in our house was an automatic washing machine. It was automatic because I was the guy that turned it.
But it's a curious thing. Even those shut out of affluence remember a general air of contentment.
People's standards and demands were not as high as they are today.
Does one ever know when you're poor? Except it's fashionable now. But with me, we didn't consider ourselves poor.
We were not well-to-do. It was years later before I made the staggering discovery that we're pretty poor people.
We always had plenty to eat and few pleasures, and we seemed very contented with what we had.
$1 would bring a dozen eggs, a pound of butter, a quart of milk, and a loaf of bread. And you got change.
We could buy our essential, and I had pretty nice clothes, and we were happy with that. We were happy.
Maybe what supported our people then was hope. Hope born of the expectation that things could and would get better. Born, too, of a new form of financing, the installment plan. If you didn't have money to buy what you wanted now, you could buy and pay for it later. The presidents of that time were optimists, too, Republican down to the cut of their suits. If they could keep wages and farm prices low, industry would prosper. For them, the business of America was business. In 1920, the Republicans nominated Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge to run against Democrats James Cox and Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had been a popular assistant secretary to the Navy.